And that's basically, I call the Rosetta Stone of, the Rosetta Stone is basically we have to assess people to see what they can do. So we're building a swing around what their capabilities are, not what they should be and not what they're not. We're not going to teach them something they can't do, or they may need 3 months in the gym to be able to maybe do. We know for sure, having done this for a long time, that when we test people, and we match their golf swing to their tested sort of movement style, then they get better very quickly and find the game to be much easier. Some of the things that we hear, well, that feels much more natural, things like this.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Sports Box webinar. Today we have Terry Rowles, our advisor, ambassador, and our Chief Science Officer, Dr. Phil Cheatham. We have a very, very exciting webinar presentation ready for you today. Terry, as you guys probably well know by now, he and Mike Adams have worked on a long-term research on basically being able to measure everybody's body measurements and the way they move in order to create a system for 9 different swing archetypes, 3 lower body movement patterns, 3 upper body movement patterns, the 9 permutations of those 3 upper body, lower body combinations. And he is going to be presenting some very, very cool details of the research, as well as the parameters and the ranges that are ideal for each of these 9 swing archetypes. So you guys have all been asking, what are the good numbers? What are the right numbers? Well, the answer is they're right numbers for each person. And so we're going to be presenting this information over the course of 3 webinars in every 2 weeks. And this is the first of that series. So I hope you guys are very excited. Yeah, Terry, do you want to say anything else about what you're going to present?
Well, it wouldn't exist without Sportsbox. It's kind of fun seeing our data baby out there, Swagap, and that was a product to one of these presentations, and seeing Bryson and Dana and some other people talking about it is very satisfying. And it turns out it's been a very useful variable for us, because it really does help us to organize the information more effectively. And there's a bunch of other things, but yeah, I mean, just the number of people that are using, motion capture Sportsbox now makes it, much more usable. And, I think it is exactly the right time where we can say, okay, who should be doing what within Sportsbox? And that's, again, I think that's going to help. And as I always say, Mike and I do try our best to make teaching easier, firstly for our students, and then secondly for ourselves. And then anybody else who wants to know, we're always very willing to discuss it. And we're absolutely not averse to somebody else coming up with a really good idea and saying, this would be something that I've seen, and, what do you think? And this is how we measure it. So we're all about, creating a big community of people that are sort of investigating, and I'm very happy to share what I have experienced and how I teach. But, obviously that's not everything that's out there, and I'd love to hear what other people are doing within this.
Awesome. And Phil, you and Terry have worked together a lot over the years, you, Terry, and Mike. What are some cool things you guys have worked on over the years? You've obviously been working in motion capture for a very, very long time, kind of the godfather of 3D, but what does it, feel like to see go from research to practice?
Well, of course, I'm extremely excited about the fact that we can, point and shoot and get 3D, that we've got the magic camera. That's something I've dreamed of for over 40 years. Obviously, over the past 20 or so years, I've been working with the AMM 3D system, which has been wonderful. It's been very, very accurate, but it's been a pain in the rear end to set somebody up and get the data, and it's got to be a controlled situation. And now, of course, it's so exciting to be able to just go out to the driving range or on the course and capture swings. That's what I'm excited about. So I think the beauty of that is we're going to get much more data from all kinds of players now. I mean, as you know, GA, you can wander out or get out to a tour event, whether LPGA or PGA, and capture swings right off the tee. And so our database can grow very rapidly.
There is no secret swing.
No, can't hide anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think it's really cool that we can know the kind of the absolute truths, like what we call tracker truths, and what 100% of pros do. But we also now have the ability to capture swings across a lot of different levels of golfers, not just the ones that have the the means to get to a 3D studio. And we can do things like, okay, for everybody who plays the game, which model is right for them? What is the absolute truth for them, potentially, right? Which is what this presentation is all about. By the way, before we get started, Terry, I'm very sorry about what happened yesterday.
I would be probably a little bit more disappointed if I'd had higher expectations. So I actually felt like, we were lucky to be there, and Spain were the better team. So it's sort of, I didn't get especially upset, but
yeah,
it would be nice if we were to have played a little bit better through the tournament, but that's okay.
Yeah. Well,
I'm actually less upset than I thought I would be, so.
I was at a pub in Glasgow
Oh, wow.
last night watching the game, and
they were cheering the Spanish goals.
Yep, 100% they were. Weren't a whole lot of English fans around there, so
no.
But it's kind of neat to be in that environment for the game. Well, I know a lot of you guys aren't here for the chit chat, so why don't we get started? Terry, take it away for us.
Okay, I'm just gonna share my content. Let's see what I got here. PowerPoint and share content screen.
By the way, Terry,
let me know if you can go on.
Yeah, we are kind of dividing it up into 3 parts.
That's right.
What's this part going to be about? And yeah, how did you divide up the presentation?
I'll probably cover that here in the next 3 minutes. So I'll defer on that question and come to it gradually. Drip feed. So it's actually a funny first screen. It looks like I'm dreaming of Mike, which I often am. Mike is, huge inspiration to many people, and walks his talk of looking at himself in the mirror every day and trying to get better, which I think all of us can do well or better. And so obviously, Mike and I have worked together for quite a long time. And, the way we came together was that I was doing, research on my AMM system and, launch monitor and things like this. And the patterns that were coming out of it were sort of really interesting. And then I met Mike, and, he presented what he was doing. And then the crossover was, really obvious. And so over the last, close to 10 years, probably, our 2 is definitely better than 1. And we bounce ideas off of each other. And I think the piece that Mike emphasizes is you have to give a lot of lessons, and Mike's the living and breathing example of that. In that it's not just sitting down and looking at data; it's using the machine, it's using the sports box or the launch monitor or whatever it is in many lessons, and then the patterns sort of emerge out of that. And Mike's teaching is emerging out of the fact that he really cares a lot about people, and he's a very intelligent person. He has a great memory, and so he can sort of pull these pieces together, and they just sort of come out over time. And I don't think there's many people that give him more lessons. So that style with Mike, and sort of my more not quite as extroverted, but I enjoy reflecting and going back and looking at Sportsbox or whichever system I'm using, and trying to make sense of what I said before and maybe what I'm going to say in the future, and it works really well together. So just to give Mike a big shout out. And the patterns that we're going to talk about here are a product of his work and the work that we've done together. I think there's a very interesting time in golf. Mike and I are writing a book, which hopefully we'll get together this year, We're working on the pictures, and we're obviously going to use some of the Sportsbox data to illustrate it. And, we're in a situation where there isn't many golf books coming out right now. And it's sort of an interesting time where people are reluctant to sort of put a flag in the ground and saying this is the way the golf swing works. We're sort of in a, well, it depends phase. And so we can look at this. I just grabbed this picture off the internet. I think Golf Works. And it's sort of negates a path almost. It's like, well, you should have a flat swing. Oh, well, hold on. How about Jim Furyk? Well, oh, hold on. How about the guy in the middle? And so historically, there's sort of, bodies that have opinions on how swing should be, but it's easy to say, well, it depends. It's all about matchups. How's the person? Their body doesn't work, whatever. And so, how do we decide what to teach is like a really important point that Mike and I make. Like, how do you decide? Like, how do you say, well, I'm definitively going to go from A to B to C to D to whatever? And that's basically, what I call the Rosetta Stone of, the Rosetta Stone is basically we have to assess people to see what they can do. So we're building a swing around what their capabilities are, not what they should be and not what they're not. We're not going to teach them something they can't do, or they may need 3 months in the gym to be able to maybe do. We know for sure, having done this for a long time, that when we test people, and we match their golf swing to their tested sort of movement style, then they get better very quickly and find the game to be much easier. Some of the things that we hear, well, that feels much more natural, things like this. So we're teaching people around what they can do. You can see some very famous players in front of us there. So we have, Adam Scott and Paul Casey, and we can see, what can they do? So we're asking them to swing their arms, and this is what they do naturally. The reason we have our hands resting on their shoulder, we're not really restricting that hard, is we want to see what the arm swing does when it's naturally moving. And we can see that, Adam Scott has sort of rotated his left arm over his right, or his right elbow is significantly in front of his shirt seam, for example. And that Paul Casey's elbow has moved back behind his shirt seam. That's really the sort of the two extremes. There's three. Let's say there's a hybrid somewhere in the middle. So we call it some amount under, when the hand rotate sort of under, or the elbows underneath. We call it on top when the elbow goes up, hand is a little bit more on top. And the hybrid would be some amount of elbow pulling in, but also some amount of rotation, which is a smaller group. So with those three, that gives us half of the kind of the matrix. We also, next time I'm going to talk about the lower body, and there's three possible outcomes in the lower body, which you can kind of see here when we look at the profiles. So it's kind of a 3x3 matrix. That the trail arm, or the arm folding style, really has a big effect on the way we set up. So like I said, we're going to talk about the lower body action, next time. Today, we're going to talk about the arm folding assessment and how it affects the way that the upper body is moving, which includes the wrists, the arms, and the sort of the torso. And if you look here, 1, 2, and 3 would be kind of like the Paul Casey, or somebody whose elbow works kind of deep and behind their shirt seam. I'm going to come on and show that a little bit better. And you can see that their upper body is a little bit more sort of stacked on top of their lower body. So there's less, sway gap away from the target. The sway gap being the gap between the upper body and lower body. So we could call that stacked. In the old days, we talked about having a sense of, staying behind the ball or covering the ball. So I guess that would be more like kind of covering it. 4, 5, and 6 would be, what we call side-on golfers, who are more of a neutral body position at the top of the backswing. And then on the bottom, we have 7, 8, and 9. These are more under golfers. And their upper body is going to be further away from the target, but in relation to their pelvis. So for us, the way that the arms fold is a huge predictor of sway gap. And it's the biggest predictor of sway gap. So if you're wondering, which sway gap you should have, I can show you guys how to do the test. And secondly, I'll come on to the numbers later, but it's going to be, somewhere around starting at 1.5, top of the backswing 1.5 for 1, 2, and 3, 2.5, top of the backswing 2.5-ish, 2-ish for the middle, and then the bottom is going to be sort of 0.5 to 1 point something. So I'll create the range later. So when we move differently, actually, I'm going to talk about the assessment first. I'm going to stand up and stop sharing my screen. Screen broadcast. Okay, can you guys see me?
So just a quick question, Terry. On the last slide, you talked about the sway gap being less on the bottom 3. Is that correct?
No, it's more. Sorry, more on the bottom 3, less on the top 3. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you misspoke there.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a misspeak. All right. So ideally, sorry, I was going to see myself. You can try this yourself at home. One of the ways I talk about this is you just literally put your hands in front of you like this, and if you imagine there's a line in the middle of your chest, if you just move your hands, across your chest like this, a lot of people, they use their knees, and if they move their body, it really doesn't count. But you really want to disassociate your arms from your chest. And you see when I do that, my elbow goes back a lot. And Mike has obviously taught us that when we take our golf posture and we swing our arms, my elbow goes back a lot like this. You saw the picture of Adam Scott. When he does this, his elbow basically tucks into his rib cage and his hand rotates. And so we have to think of that in time and space and ask ourselves what it means. So if, for example, I have my hands here and my elbow pulls back to move my hands, my hand path gets deeper. It's a very important variable. And also secondarily, you go, well, what is moving my hands? My shoulder retraction is moving my hands. Whereas if I'm here like this and I'm rotating like this, it's going to be, supination, pronation, and very little shoulder retraction. So there's actually some external rotation in there as well. So this is, it's very different. And if anyone's interested, I've probably got some video somewhere I can send afterwards of some people that I'm testing. And that has a big effect. So if I'm going to, fold my arm like this, my elbow is going to tuck in and my hand's going to go, my lead hand is going to go around my fixed hub. And so consequently, the hand path is now much less deep. And I would call that more of a vertical hand path or more of a deeper hand path. And that is a measurable variable in Sportsbox. And it has a big effect on quite a few things. So people whose elbows tend to go like this tend to stand closer to the ball. Their hands are lower, which is partially because, when we're this golfer, hands tend to be more on top of the club. So it's more like a strong left, weak right hand type of grip. And that helps. That means that our hands kind of stay on top of the shaft. And we always look at this like it's a discus thrower. Whereas somebody who's more of a under golfer, their hands want to rotate kind of more under the shaft. So they're going to have slightly weaker left hand, slightly stronger right hand. And when they rotate, their right hand is under the shaft, left hand under the shaft. That person needs room for that to happen, right? So if I'm going to be rotating my hands like this, I need space for that to happen. And so what we see at setup, we haven't yet got that as a measurable variable. We do have shaft angle at address and during the swing, which I'll show later. I'm going to share my screen and come back to that. So if you look at, for example, here we've got 3 examples. We got Ricky Fowler, whose handle is very low, which helps him to get his left and right hand grips more on his fingers, which helps him to wrap his hands more over the shaft. His handle extension of his club points into his groin, and his arms are pretty vertical. So that's more of an on-top style. And from there, it's a lot easier to have the arms work around your ribs. Tiger Woods is Mr. Neutral, so we can see the shaft basically pointing into his belt buckle. The hands on the toes. That's pretty much the midpoint. Emiliano Grillo and many others who are under golfers, if you extend the shaft, it's more into the belly button, and obviously a lot further away from the ball to give him that room to be able to move. As I said about the grips, You know, Tiger Woods, that was a little bit weaker left hand. That was 2008. Jordan Spieth, who is kind of a weak left, stronger right. And on the right side, we can see somebody who's got a stronger left, weaker right. And that's sort of the three styles, sort of a hybrid. And obviously there's you know, all sorts of nuances, but I'm just giving a big picture here. Sway gap, I'm going to go through the swings here. You'll see that, you know, Bryson probably has slightly more than average address in this particular swing for him. He's probably going to be around one-ish, depending on the shot he's hitting. You know, we know that Bryson actually has pretty high hands and likes to hit a draw. So this probably is slightly more than average, but generally speaking, you know, we see Stuart Sink on the right side as a pretty good example of an under golfer who has pretty big sway gap, and Hideki in the middle. Usually we'll see the number address sort of morph into the number at the top. It's going to be really close. So you can see that Bryson's got a little bit smaller, which says, you know, it's kind of what I said is that he started maybe with a tiny bit more than his style, but he ended up with 1 inch. Hideki ended up with 2, and Stuart Sink there has got 4, which is probably a fraction bigger than he would need. And then impact, we're going to see the sway gap increase. So actually, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to show this live on the sportsbooks later. But you know, with Phil, we talked about tracker truths a year or two ago, and so the sway gap is a product of understanding where the middle of the chest and the middle of the pelvis are in space. And a tracker truth, 100%er, Phil, if I'm correct, is that the chest and pelvis in the best players both move towards the target through the transition. So this is a really important phase. One of the key variables I see when people are struggling is that the sway gap actually increases too early. So they don't carry a positive motion through transition. They actually their upper body starts hanging back, you know, through transition. And it's kind of an interesting difference. It's like a successful tour player, you're not going to see that very much. You know, you start getting into like club pros and low handicap golfers, you know, sort of club champs, things like that. You're actually going to see it a little bit more often. So that's actually a really interesting variable that obviously is able to distinguish between two pretty high level sets of players. So for me, sway gap is a really, really important variable. Through impact, you know, I always talk about the club being kind of like a hammer. It gets heavier as it gets further from us in the downswing, and it's pulling on us and we're pulling on it. So as we move through impact, every single tour player has the sway gap increasing, because in order to create kind of a circle with a heavy object pulling away from us, we have to pull back on it to stop it pulling us over. And, you know, that's part of the product, you know, the system that we use to sort of, you know, hit the sweet spot. So we can see here increasing number in sway gap with somebody like Bryson, who's more of an on-top golfer. And we can even see, if you look really closely at the trail hand grip and trail elbow positions, that Bryson is slightly on top of the grip and Stuart Sink is undoubtedly under the grip with his right elbow more turned down towards his trail hip. As I mentioned before, the way that our trail arm folds and our hands rotate or don't affects what I call the hand path to head path. I think we're working on this in the system, but this is something I use on a daily basis. And we can see here that, for example, Scott Scheffler's hand path stays inside of his head path. So the yellow line is the head path, the blue line is his hand path. Lee Westwood's more neutral side-on golfer, and obviously John Rahm's hand path is more vertical, but his shaft is flatter. So his hands rotate as his right elbow tucks in. So that causes a less deep, more vertical hand path. And you can see really clearly halfway back here. And again, with Sportsbox, you don't always have to have numbers, because, you know, we can also use video. So we can see here, if we look at where Scottie Scheffler's hands are relative to his chest, his hands are more in front of his right armpit, deeper. Lee Westwood's more of a hybrid, middle of the chest, and John Rahm, like many other the under golfers, because the way that trail elbow sets is more in front or more close to the left side of his chest. We can measure that. That's called mid-hands thrust. We can see two different styles of golfer here. If we look at the different types of right arm action here, so we've basically carried that trail arm fold test to the top of the backswing, and we can see clearly that Ludwig Aberg has a much deeper right arm, and we can see his bicep. We can see sort of the separation between his body and his shirt there, where Jon Rahm's trail elbow has folded more under, his right hand's more under the shaft. Obviously, it's a little bit of a shorter swing, but we can see from the mid-hands thrust information, address is zeroed out. Backswing club horizontal. Ludwig is -2, so his hands have started moving in early. Whereas if we jump over to Jon Rahm, we can see that his is positive. So there's 3.7 inches difference when the club is horizontal on the backswing. Top of the backswing, we've got about 4 inches, which I can imagine that somebody is sitting there saying, well, Jon Rahm's got less turn. I don't think it makes 4 inches of difference. Maybe it makes 1 or 2, whatever, but it's more a product of the depth of the trail elbow. This is something that I find is discussed a lot in golf instruction, and I'm really happy that we have a way to measure it. The trick is, because it's zeroed out at address, it's relative, not absolute. So, if we look at it absolutely, we can see that, Jon Rahm's hands and elbows are much more in front of his chest, is relative to where they start. Now, the on-top golfer, Aberg there has his hands much more over his, right butt cheek. But it's relative to where he started, and he started a lot closer. So absolutely they're very different, maybe 6 inches difference, I don't know, but relative to where they started, there's a smaller difference because of the nature of the setup. We can also see the shaft, and again, we can see some pretty interesting hand thrust numbers there. Somebody who tucks their trail arm in immediately and their right hand goes under the shaft is going to lay the club flatter. So that's a more vertical hand path with a flatter shaft plane in the backswing, and we can see Ludwig with a deeper hand path and a less flat swing, and that's pretty common. So if you look at somebody like Jack Nicklaus talking about how he kept his club in between his elbows, so deep and steep would be an extreme, and then vertical and flat would be the opposite, and we can measure those. Currently, those are indicators in terms of the relative to positions. We can also see that in the downswing. There you go. So that's sort of some of the pieces. I'm very happy to go through, Sportsbox. Where am I? There we are. And answer any questions around that. Let me know.
Yeah, everyone, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A function in Zoom.
I thought it actually added another one, but somehow it disappeared between my computer and my PowerPoint. The trail arm fold is also a big difference. So if you imagine if somebody's going to do this versus do this, the trail arm folds at a different rate. So if you look at under golfers, so people whose hand goes more under like this, they fold their arm earlier in the backswing, and on-top golfers keep it straighter a little bit longer, which again contributes very much to that sort of shaft angle in the backswing. So two main variables in terms of the way that test affects the shape of the swing is depth and shaft rotation or shaft pitch, and then to accommodate that type of movement pattern, which occurs basically on both sides, distance from the ball and sway gap really help, because if your arms are working out in front of you and your hand path is a lot more vertical, having more sway gap is a shallower to match up to that steepener.
So Terry, I have a quick question, and you alluded to timing. So is timing of when these things happen at the beginning of the backswing or during the backswing, is that important in each case?
What's interesting, I would say, Phil, is we're a product of nature and nurture, and nurture is such that the earlier in the swing it happens, the more easy it is to change, and the later in the swing it happens, the harder it is. So it's sometimes hard to judge with absolute certainty. I feel like, what Mike and I do is a predictive system. We predict how, people should move before we see them move. And, we're very willing to change if we get it wrong, and we adapt on a, small things on a regular basis. But, if you look at, the two different styles, for example, we'll go, and I know you won't be able to recall it, but many others will. So if you have someone like Danny Willett, for example, he tucks his elbow and sets his wrist very early. So that would be like an early set of that system. Whereas someone like Tommy Fleetwood probably tries to take it more neutrally in the start of the swing, and then sets it a little bit later. Fred Couples, just as a sort of pick it up, but then at some point in the downswing, he would develop that relationship. One of the ways to understand that variable, I would say, is like Jack Nicklaus saying, I want to keep the club between my elbows. If you want to keep it between your elbows, then something else has got to move, right? The club is not really moving side to side, so the elbow has to get deeper, and that's sort of Jack Nicklaus's flying elbow. The other way to look at that is, if you're an under golfer, you need to get the head of the club outside your elbow at some point. And some people do it early, some people drift and then sort of set it through transition. And some people, like Fred Couples, they're even setting it down here. If you look at, seen Fred Couples 3Ds, he's supinating very late in the downswing to try and get the head in a position where, where it sort of suits his arm style, which is super interesting.
Okay, we've got some questions loaded up. Sean Duncan wants to know, can you summarize the 3 upper body movements and their names? And Jerry Pratt wanted to know, how does this compare to Mike Adams's analysis?
Very similar. This is the sports box version of it, I would say. So sway gap, Mike has historically called it counter swivel and counter tilt, and it's referred more to the relationship between the upper body and the lower body of the grip styles. Using sports box, we see that the sway gap is a dynamic, ongoing relationship that is very much driven by the trail arm folding action. So Mike 100% agrees, and it's not just the top of the backswing, it's the transition track of truth. Are you continuing to sustain your gap? Is it increasing or decreasing? If it decreases, probably more likely to slice. Increase, it's probably more likely to be a hook kind of swing. And then through transition, the understanding that the sway gap is increasing. So these have all been additions to Mike's 5 years ago system. So it depends which kind of version of Mike you're talking about. He currently, I talk on a regular basis, and we're very much lined up on these things. Hand path to head path, what we're talking about here is the hand path depth and how the trail arm fold test that Mike developed affects it. And so obviously, Mike is going to agree with that. So hand path to head path is one of the variables, which is, how does the trail arm folding affect or not? So that gives us hand path depth as a single variable. The shaft pitch is very much to do with that. Whether we're driving the club through, rotating it or dragging it, will have a distinct shape change. And if you're, referring to things like, wingspan length and things like that, mobility, they're going to have an effect as well. But, this is the presentation we're going to be making in our book. It's going to be organized from the 9 swing profiles out. So 9 swing profiles, and then adaptations regarding, wingspan, mobility, forearm length, things like this are downstream of those things.
Okay, Terry, Chihei's phone died, so I'll take over, I think. Rick Peckham, what number on Sportsbox AI should an on-top rear post look for? So videos should be down the line, question mark.
Yeah, I think from down the line. So I would say, so basically sway gap, about 1 to 1.5 inches at address and top. And then probably about 6 inches through impact, so not hanging back too much. From a down the line standpoint, hand path depth. I think, somewhere more than probably, I think 13 inches. And shaft pitch, so I think Oberg was, on the edge of where he should be. Probably, I would like to see it slightly more upright than what he had it generally for on top. But obviously, there's a lot more variables than just these two. But for us, these two get us really, really close to. I mean, if people just address these two, they're going to get really good. But obviously, we've got things like ball position. We've got mobility and stance alignment and things like this that come into it, which is, a big deal too. But they're not defining. These are defining. So that was for rear post. Rear post, we're going to talk about. So the rear post is next week. The on top is this week. But to be honest, the sway gap number is dramatically driven by the upper body action and not the lower body action. So it's a relative measurement, relative upper body to the lower body. And the absolute numbers of chest sway and pelvis sway will be bigger if you're somebody that shifts more to the trail side. But the relationship is not changing a significant amount. Surprisingly, right? So that's why we measure.
Cool. All right, we've got a couple more questions here. Oscar Fraustro, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What do you do when a good player now still misses both ways, learn to move as an under golfer, but measures as a side or cover golfer? I guess it's asking you to change them, obviously.
Well, it's a coaching question, right? I mean, you have to set an objective. I mean, the person comes to see you, you discuss what they're there for. Are they committed? How committed? Are you want a quick fix or you want to get better? Usually ridicule is a really good bridge to success. And if you want to see the best jokes, then go and watch the Rodney Dangerfield of golf, which is Mike. At the end of the day, in my opinion, I say it to people as well. So look, we're not at school anymore. You don't have to do what I say, but we're going to explore some variables, and it's much more effective to understand if I do this, it does that. And I think that's what Jack Nicklaus taught us, but we didn't really listen. It's a very practical approach. If you move your grip, the ball does that. If you move your stance, the ball does this. If you do whatever. So you associate the change to something measurable externally, and then you can build on top of that. So, I would imagine he's coming for a lesson, so he probably wants to get better. If his grip is too strong, club face is probably either closing too early. So we call the grip the main thing that controls the timing of when the face squares up, and it's different for different people. And, so he's either, hooking it because the face is closing too early, or hitting blocks because he doesn't want to let the face close too early. And that's a pretty tiring and ineffective way to play golf. So, if we were to say, okay, we'll change the guy's grip, we'll make it more neutral or weaker or whatever, and he doesn't change anything else, depending on what his problem is, if he's blocking it, he's going to block it even more. But now he has the capacity to square the club up more robustly with more energy and not overhook it. So the way that we teach, we consider everything to have a left and right effect, or a steepening and shallowing effect, and what have you. And so we have a principle where movement is always the solution. We use dynamic matchups. So if we change the grip to the degree where it squares the face on time, you can add variables that add energy to the system. They allow the trail arm to extend, for example, which will square the face more, but not too much because of the grip. So you're trying to layer the changes on top of each other. We want to have dynamic variables laid on top of each other, but the personality of the person you're teaching is partially down to you, partially down to them. And that really comes back to the pre-swing. You got to do a deal first and understand why they're there, what they're willing to do, why you and not someone else, which is why it's really hard to give free advice. The person's not bought in. it's hard to give tips because they might need 3 things and not 1 thing. You know, you might have to introduce, I don't know, 2 lefts and 1 right variable. You might have to, let's say, weaken their grip, increase their rotation, and increase their release. That's 2 lefts and 1 right, in order to net out at 0, right? And so, you know, some mastery of how these things relate together, but with the overriding principle that you should be always trying to make them more athletic. You know, we call it offense versus defense. And Mike and I live and die by that principle, and you won't see us teaching people to restrict joints.
Yeah, okay. From Tim Carlson, do you see any changes to trail hand grip for a player who plays opposite their natural dominant hand? For example, a player who is left-handed but plays golf right-handed, similar to Spieth or Mickelson.
There's such a small number of people that do it, to be honest. It's really hard to have an absolute answer to that. You know, interestingly, I'll change more of the cues that I use. You know, Mike will say that he makes the trail hand a little bit stronger, but I haven't really have enough experience to stand on that one. I personally just use more lead hand cues, so I'm making sure that their grip is matching their arm folding style, and then encouraging them to use their sort of more familiar movement style. You know, for maybe they, you know, need to feel like they're throwing a frisbee, or, you know, they're twisting their knuckles to the ground or something like this. But they'll have a lot more ability to, and obviously you have to match the lead hand to the degrees to which you're teaching the release. But I would say I think you just have to be smart. I think it's more about communication than grip. You know, golf coaching is really hard, and working out how to communicate and how to make a difference is a skill. And, you know, to reduce it down to that single variable, I wouldn't say that I would say that. I would say there's probably more things involved than just the trail hand in this case. And I would say the first thing I would do is transfer my communication to the lead arm.
Okay, thank you. Madhu Sudhan, can you please explain the wrist angles from the cover golfer to the under golfer, and what's the difference from the address to the top of the swing with numbers, how it changes?
Well, the biggest difference is the supination pronation. Interestingly, when you watch a golfer, almost all golfers, and Phil can explain this better than me, that, you know, so supination pronation, but, you know, if I hold my hand, I can also move my elbow. So it's actually and it's a relationship. So it's sort of a hard thing to measure. But I think because of the inertia of the club, almost everybody's trail wrist, for example, pronates early. And then the under golfers is going to have, depending on where they start as well. I mean, they may start supinated, but they're gonna show a little bit more, you know, rotation and radial. The on-top golfer potentially is actually going to pronate early, which actually is a big help. I use that cue with a lot of people. Phil and I have discussed this. If you remember, Phil, we talk about how inverse. So if I were to supinate, my elbow actually wants to move in front of my rib cage. So, you know, supinating early is a beneficial wrist action for under golfers because it actually supports their trail arm movement style. Whereas if they were to, you know, take this back and say, well, you got to keep your hand quite early, then the only thing left to sort of move the club other than the pivot is, you know, this trail arm. Obviously, there's some pushing of the lead hand, but just talking about trail hand. So that is kind of counter to what they should be doing. And like I said, there's different timings when that happens. But, you know, with you know, some of the on-top golfers that I've seen on AMM, they have very little wrist rotation. So if you think about how the hands and the wrist travel, what you're going to see is, you know, let's say they're bent over more, their hands are in. So this forces the elbow to be pulling the hands in. And, you know, by the time this elbow is, you know, moved around the corner, the wrists now are in a different orientation. And if Jack Nicklaus says, well, you set the club between your elbows, that's more of a vertical kind of setting action versus if I pin my elbow, there's more rotation. So that's sort of probably the way I would look at it. And then, some of the things are hard to measure, such as the degree to which we retract our shoulder or, how deep the elbow gets, but which is real, because if you're on top golfer, the fact that the elbow should be continuing to get deeper, like Scotty Scheffler, will limit the amount of supination and pronation. So left-hand grip, it's pretty clear to me that golf swing is kind of some amount of in and some amount of up. It's not a perfect line in the human body. There's a combination of factors, but whatever the lead wrist extension is, at the address, more or less, it sort of flattens out a little bit early, but then reestablishes itself. So more on-top golfers with a lower handle will tend to have more lead wrist cup. Under golfers with a higher handle, weaker left-hand grip will tend to have a little bit of a flatter left wrist. But Phil and I did grip research. The grips are they kind of they're a pretty big scattergram, right, Phil?
Yeah.
And again, that comes back to nature and nurture. It comes back to shot choice. What I'm talking about is sort of a starting point, and there's some decisions to be made as to, like Bryson's high handle technically is not, what I would teach as a starting point, but the way that he explains it, a weak left hand will tend to be a more rightward swing direction. It also enables his trail arm to work more effectively in terms of that he can fully release, but not over release. And, he has one of the highest shaft rotation speeds in the system, I think, Phil. And his setup has sort of facilitated that. So he's able to, fully twist the shaft into impact, but not over close it. And then the handle height and location, really encourage the hand path to go more down the line versus around the corner. People with lower hands will tend to do that. So,
yeah, well, actually related to that, here's a question from Gabriel Lagoras. Have you found a relationship from each of the three elbow set golfers and any shot shape bias or path bias? So I guess that's referring to the grip as well.
Generally, yes, I would say. But again, it's if you want to pin me to a tree and say it's absolutely like this. I mean, on top golfers, will tend to hit down on the ball more. They deliver more loft because the hand to face relationship, the trail hand, is a more open face to hand relationship. And in the act of closing the face, the handle actually decelerates earlier. So there's less shaft lean, more loft. So, if you look at, the ping driver fitting chart that Chris Brody created, you're going to see the on-top golfer on the lower launch, higher spin end of the spectrum. But, it's totally feasible to then be able to manipulate their setup like Bryson has, or like Patrick Reed does. He plays from a closed stance. So that sort of affects the attack angle. So slightly steeper attack angle, lower shaft through the ball, more spin loft. Under golfers, closed face to hand relationship, slightly more upward attack angle, higher face contact, lower spin. So, up whatever, 4 or 5 degrees, 2000 spin. So, the fact that the face is closed to the grip, they now have to deliver the club in such a way that changes the timing. So there's slightly more, the hands are further around the hand path, and that person will deliver slightly less loft, but with a more upward angle attack. So upward angle attack with less spin. So, I would say that's fairly true. Obviously, there's more than these two variables, but I mean that's pretty strong place to start from, to be honest. Now, if you're trying to get an on-top golfer, who's got a low sway gap and low hands, bent over close to the ball, to hit up on it as a single variable, you're probably going to make them worse. But you can build them into it if you understand how to put these pieces together.
Okay, thank you. So from Adam Fryer, have you or Mike, in your vast experience, seen or studied a world-class player's technique who evolved a really functional model that doesn't fit their body type, size, etc.?
Ooh, it's super unusual, I would say. I mean, there's, I would say one of the interesting ones is Brooks Koepka's trail hand grip is pretty strong, but so is he. And you can see sort of how he, pulls, a little bit of a chicken wing through impact. I would say that would be one of them, but at the same time, like literally like every single thing he does other than that, I really like his hand path, his sway gap. He really does have a good swing other than that single variable. So he hits more of a pull cut fade, I would say. But it's pretty unusual, to be honest. I mean, obviously there's people that have changed their swings, and so Nick Faldo is a profile 7, which means he's an under golfer, front post probably. I've tested his underness, and the things that he changed to become a better golfer were absolutely in line with the way that his body works, and so that makes total sense that he got better. Obviously, there's many swings and people out there who have made changes that probably didn't support their style. But to be honest, I would say I don't know how you define success, but the higher you go, the more matched up they are. As I said before, what Phil and I have talked about is tracker truths with chest sway, for example. I would say you probably are going to see a number of chests that don't sway towards the target enough on the Corn Ferry Tour or the Symetra Tour. But as you start moving up into the high levels of tour winners or people who've been able to keep their car for a very long period of time, I think it'd be hard to find people that are mismatched in that single variable. So I would say matchups, as far as we're concerned, really do mirror the person's ability to play consistently. Because if you move according to the way that your body moves naturally, you don't have to remember how to swing. If you're trying to mismatch on purpose because someone told you some abstract variable is more efficient, and then you remember the linguistics of that efficient in comparison to what, then you'd probably have to practice more, and you'd have to remind yourself to do it, and all these kind of things. So trying to tap into someone's intrinsic sort of ability to move is, Mike and I have got 75 years of teaching experience, and it's like saying Jack Nicklaus and I have got 18 majors. And together we do have a intellectual sort of honesty in that we only really want to do the things that work. We're not here to convince anybody of anything. We don't want to stand here for 6 or 8 hours a day and tell people things that don't work. I mean, it's a sort of a natural sort of laziness and efficiency in how we do it.
We've got still, it seems like we keep answering questions, but we've still got the same amount of questions to answer. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through all of them, but we'll do our best, and the others we'll try and email you an answer later on. I'll post these to Terry, and maybe he can do
I can just make a video to answer them.
Yeah, that would be good. So here's another question. Just as there is a relationship between the hand path and head path on the backswing, is there a corresponding relationship post impact?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think
does it matter?
Yeah, there's more variables, right? I would say mobility through transition plays a really big role in the trajectory of the club and the hands. I mean, nothing more important than the arm folding style, but you can stack these things. If you have somebody who's, a 13-year-old, extremely flexible, maybe playing with a club that's too heavy, high speed, whatever it is, there's going to be trajectory variances in mobility. The forearm versus upper arm that we measure becomes apparent as the load increases through transition. But yeah, I would say yes. I mean, I'm standing here with a picture of Adam Scott behind me, and we can see that, he's got a pretty weak left hand. His elbow is significantly in front of his shirt seam, and he's got quite a lot of forearm rotation. And that, for me, if you remember, if you go back to the picture of me testing him, really does line up with his trail arm style. So I would say, you know, and I actually test people like this on both sides and explain to them how their release should work relative to how that assessment works. So yeah, so I think I would say, you know, the trail and lead arm usually work the same. I've had a couple of people who test differently, and there's usually an injury or something that's happened, which is very interesting. So I'd say it's a huge effect, to be honest, and it's supported by a good lead hand grip. It's supported by a good distance from the ball, you know, appropriate handle height to facilitate, you know, the type of action that you're trying to chase.
Okay, here's an interesting one, and it's kind of related to speed, I guess, swing speed. Doesn't on top or under grip work better sometimes when it comes to a person who can only swing at maybe at 60 miles per hour? Do you go more steepeners or go as tested? In other words, I guess, does speed affect how you apply after you've done the testing?
Well, something I talk about on a daily basis, other than kinematic sequence fill, which I do. Sequencing is important. So, you know, having disassociations, like being able to move the joints in different times, is very important for speed. I would say with that, you know, degrees of freedom, sequencing, matchups, these all help our hand-eye coordination. And so the ability to hit the middle of the club face on a regular basis is obviously a very important thing. And, you know, when we're talking about do we make more steepeners than shallows as a single variable, we're assuming that they, you know, have a pretty good grip. They're able to move their body in a way that sort of suits their style. Because at the end of the day, club head speed is the biggest factor that influences ball speed and therefore distance. And if all of those things have been lined up and you then want to adjust their attack angle, you have a couple of options. You know, you obviously want to make sure that their sway gap is correct, but we would have that person potentially close their stance if they're an on-top golfer in order to shallow out their angle of attack and maximize launch angle. But that would not be one of the first things that we do. If you're trying to teach someone to shallow out their angle of attack, but they can't square the face at the right time, and you know they're starting with the shaft at the wrong height for the height that their hands want to deliver it. I mean, they're fighting. So you basically got to untangle someone's swing before you start applying the fine details, in my opinion. That wouldn't be the first thing I do, but it's definitely a very good solution for somebody whose attack angle is too shallow. You know, alternatively, we have juniors and, you know, people are under and they got short arms and, you know, they're very flexible. Then you need to do things to help them steepen out their angle of attack. And so things like, you know, opening the stance, which takes their swing direction more to the left, help, you know, adapting the ball position to match up. You know, a lot of times those golfers will have, you know, more loft. So there's setup things you can do, but usually, you know, Mike and I are definitely facilitating a less tangled up, more consistent swing to maximize hand-eye coordination first. That's for us consistency, and then adapting to the desired ball flight after that.
All right, well, I think that's about it. It's a little bit past 4 o'clock. That was really interesting, and of course it's being recorded. So if those people online right now would like to see it again and go through it a few times, because there's a plethora of information there, unbelievable amount of information. And we'll try and get back to those questions that haven't been unanswered. Terry may be able to do some videos. So it will.
Yeah, I can just answer if you send the list.
I will, and these will be, of course, on the Sportsbox YouTube channel, together with a lot more other information. One of the questions was about accuracy. There's, in fact, an entire webinar about accuracy. So, yeah, please go ahead and jump onto the Sportsbox YouTube channel.
And consistency, accuracy and consistency. I think we're quite proud of where we're at right now.
especially now we've got Bryson, depending on our consistency, which has
Yeah.
proven to be very, very tight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, that's it for now.
Congratulations,
Thanks, Terry.
team.
Thank you. And we'll see you at your next webinar. Is that going to be next week or?
I think it's in 2 weeks, Phil.
All
2
right.
weeks today. I'm going to talk about lower body, and then the last one we're going to put it all together.
All right. Well, everybody keep your eyes out for that. It'll be coming. So bye from Sportsbox and Terry.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks, Phil. G.